Rain lashed against the windows, mimicking the storm brewing inside me. "You will either serve my husband or get out of my house," my daughter spat, her words sharp as shards of glass. I looked at her, really looked at her, a stranger in the face I once knew. Her eyes, once full of childhood wonder, were now cold, hardened. The son-in-law sat silently in the armchair, a smug smirk playing on his lips. He didn't need to speak. His silence was deafening. "Is that what you really want?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She didn't hesitate. "This is my house now," she declared, her voice dripping with venom, "and you're no longer welcome here unless you're willing to earn your keep." The rain continued its relentless assault, each drop a tiny hammer blow against the glass. I looked around the living room, at the photographs on the mantelpiece, the worn armchair I'd sat in for countless evenings, the bookshelves lined with volumes I'd collected over a lifetime. This house, filled with memories, was no longer my home. "Very well," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I understand." I turned and walked upstairs, the silence of the son-in-law following me like a shadow. In my bedroom, I opened the wardrobe and began packing a suitcase. I didn't need much. A few changes of clothes, toiletries, my favorite book. The material possessions that once held significance now seemed trivial, weightless. What was the point of clinging to objects when the very foundations of my life were crumbling? As I folded my shirts, I noticed a framed photograph on my bedside table. It was a picture of my daughter and me, taken on her 10th birthday. She was beaming, her arms wrapped around my neck. I picked up the frame, my fingers tracing the outline of her younger, happier face. A wave of sadness washed over me, so intense it nearly knocked me off my feet. I placed the photograph gently in the suitcase, a bittersweet reminder of what had been lost. Downstairs, the son-in-law was still in the armchair, flipping through a magazine, oblivious to my presence. My daughter stood by the window, her back to me, seemingly absorbed in the storm raging outside. I paused in the doorway, taking one last look at the room, at the life I was leaving behind. "Goodbye," I said quietly. Neither of them responded. I walked out into the rain, the slam of the front door echoing behind me like a final punctuation mark. The downpour soaked through my clothes in an instant, but I didn't care. I walked away from the house, away from the betrayal, into the unknown. As I walked, a strange calmness settled over me. The hurt and anger were still there, simmering beneath the surface, but they were accompanied by a newfound sense of resolve. I had been cast aside, discarded like an unwanted piece of furniture, but I wasn't broken. I was simply free from the suffocating expectations, the constant judgments, the relentless demands. I was free to build a new life, a life on my own terms. I reached the bus stop and sat down on the damp bench, the suitcase at my feet. The rain continued to fall, washing away the remnants of the old life, cleansing me, preparing me for what lay ahead. As the bus pulled up, I couldn't help but smile. This was just the beginning. They thought they had won, that they had successfully pushed me out of the picture. They had no idea what I was capable of. They had no idea about the quiet storm gathering within me, a storm that would eventually return to reclaim what was rightfully mine. I boarded the bus, the city lights blurring through the rain-streaked windows, and a single thought echoed in my mind. They will regret this. They will regret this deeply. Rain lashed against the bus shelter, mirroring the storm inside me. Just hours ago, I was in my own home, told by my own daughter, serve my husband or get out of my house. Now, here I sat, a single suitcase at my feet, the sum total of my belongings. Each drop that splattered on the perspex felt like another nail hammered into the coffin of my former life. I watched the city lights blur through the rain-streaked glass, a disorienting kaleidoscope of red and yellow. Where was I going? I didn't have an answer. Not yet. A young couple huddled close beside me, sharing an umbrella and whispered secrets. Their casual intimacy was a stark reminder of everything I had lost, everything my daughter and her son-in-law had taken from me. The bus finally arrived, its brakes hissing like a tired sigh. I climbed aboard, finding a seat near the back, away from the other passengers. As the bus pulled away from the curb, I looked back at the receding lights of the city, a lump forming in my throat. My home, my life, everything I'd worked for, disappearing into the distance. The rhythmic rumble of the engine and the gentle rocking of the bus lulled me into a state of numb detachment. I closed my eyes, trying to block out the memories, the hurt, the anger. It was no use. Daughter's words echoed in my mind, a cruel refrain. Serve my husband. I opened my eyes and stared out the window. The landscape had changed. We were no longer in the city, but on a quiet country road lined with trees and fields. The rain had stopped, and a sliver of moon peeked through the clouds. It was a beautiful sight, but I couldn't appreciate it. All I could feel was a deep, gnawing emptiness. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my wallet. There wasn't much money left, just enough for a few nights in a cheap motel. I'd have to find work, somewhere, anywhere, start over. The thought was daunting, overwhelming. I was a man in his late 50s, starting over from scratch. The bus pulled into a small town. The only sign of life, a flickering neon sign above a diner. I decided to get off. Maybe a hot meal and a cup of coffee would help clear my head. The diner was nearly empty, just a couple of truckers sitting at the counter. I sat at a booth near the back, and a waitress with tired eyes came over to take my order. "Just coffee, please," I said, my voice raspy. She nodded and shuffled off to the kitchen. I watched her go, then looked around the diner. It was a simple, unassuming place, the kind of place I used to frequent on road trips with my family. Another wave of sadness washed over me. Those days were gone now. The waitress returned with my coffee. "Anything else?" she asked. I shook my head. "No, thank you." She set the mug down and walked away. I took a sip of the hot, bitter liquid, letting the warmth spread through me. It didn't do much to ease the ache in my chest, but it was a start. I sat there for a long time, just sipping my coffee and staring out the window. The town was quiet, peaceful, a stark contrast to the chaos I'd left behind. Maybe this was a good place to start over, a place where nobody knew me, where I could be someone new. I paid for my coffee and stepped back out into the night. The air was crisp and cool, a welcome change from the stuffy bus. I walked down the main street, looking for a place to stay. I found a small motel on the edge of town, its sign flickering dimly. The room was basic, but clean, with a double bed, a small TV, and a bathroom. It wasn't much, but it was a roof over my head. I set my suitcase down and sat on the edge of the bed, exhaustion finally catching up with me. I closed my eyes, and for the first time since daughter had uttered those cruel words, I felt a flicker of hope. This wasn't the end. It was a new beginning. The next morning, I woke up feeling surprisingly refreshed. I showered, dressed, and went down to the motel lobby to check out. The owner, a kindly old woman with a warm smile, asked me where I was headed. "I'm not sure yet," I replied, "just looking for a place to start over." She nodded sympathetically. "Well, I wish you luck," she said. "This town isn't much, but the people are good." I thanked her and stepped back out into the sunshine. I walked down the street, breathing in the fresh air, a sense of purpose settling over me. I needed to find work, a place to live, rebuild my life. As I walked, I passed a small bookstore. Something about it drew me in. I browsed the shelves, running my fingers along the spines of the books. It had been a long time since I'd read for pleasure. I picked up a book on financial planning, a subject that had always interested me. As I flipped through the pages, an idea began to form in my mind. A subtle, almost imperceptible smile played on my lips. Daughter and her son-in-law thought they had won. They thought they had pushed me out, taken everything from me. They were wrong. I still had one card left to play, and I was about to play it. Rain lashed against the motel room window, mirroring the tempest inside me. A week ago, I was in my own home, my own life. Then my daughter, my own flesh and blood, told me to serve my husband or get out. The words echoed, sharp and cold, even over the drumming rain. Now here I sat, the cheap motel bed springs digging into my back, the air thick with the smell of stale coffee and regret. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, a cascade of missed calls lighting up the screen. Eleanor, again and again. 7 missed calls in the last hour alone. I let it ring, the insistent trill a small, bitter victory in the hollow ache of my displacement. She left messages, too, I knew, probably frantic, demanding, wondering where I was, what I was doing. Good. Let her wonder. Let her stew. I picked up the phone, not to answer, but to check the voicemail. Her voice, tight with anxiety, filled the small room. "Dad, where are you? Julian and I need to talk to you. Call us back." "It's important, important," I snorted. A week ago, I wasn't important enough to stay in my own home. Now, suddenly, I was important. I deleted the messages, a flicker of something cold and hard settling in my chest. This wasn't just hurt anymore. This was something else, resolve, maybe. Or perhaps something darker. I opened my suitcase, the meager contents a stark reminder of my dispossession. A few changes of clothes, toiletries, my old photo album. That was it. Everything else, a lifetime of memories and possessions, was still back at the house I'd paid for, the house I'd maintained, the house that was now apparently my son-in-law's domain. He'd moved in like a conquering hero, subtly changing things, rearranging furniture, replacing my favorite armchair with some modern monstrosity. He even started parking his car in my spot in the garage. Small things, insidious things, designed to erode my presence, to make me feel like a guest in my own home. And Eleanor, my sweet, bright Eleanor, had allowed it, encouraged it, even. She'd become a stranger, her eyes reflecting his ambitions, his desires, not the values I'd instilled in her. I reached into the inside pocket of my suitcase and pulled out a small, leather-bound notebook. It contained all my financial information, meticulously documented. Account numbers, passwords, investment details, everything. I flipped it open, the familiar rows of figures a source of strange comfort. This, at least, was still mine. This was power. And I knew exactly how to use it. I started with the utilities, a few quick calls, a few confirmations, and the electricity, gas, and water accounts for the house were switched to my name, the billing address changed to this cheap motel room. Let them figure out why the lights went out, why the hot water stopped running. Let them scramble to pay the bills they'd assumed I'd continue to cover, oblivious to their own precarious financial situation. Next, the credit cards. Eleanor and her husband, Julian, had supplementary cards on my accounts. Convenient, I'd thought, a way to help them out, to give them a little financial breathing room. Foolish. Another quick call, and those cards were canceled. I imagined the scene. Julian trying to impress some business associates with a fancy dinner. The card declined. Eleanor at the supermarket checkout, her groceries piling up, the card rejected again. The humiliation, the confusion, the dawning realization that their easy life was over. A grim smile touched my lips. Finally, the mortgage. This was the big one. The house was in my name, but I'd allowed Eleanor and Julian to believe they owned it, to feel secure, to build their lives within its walls. A mistake, a colossal mistake. I wouldn't foreclose, not yet, but I did arrange to have the mortgage payments automatically deducted from a different account, one they knew nothing about. Let them sweat. Let them wonder if they were about to lose everything. Let the fear, the uncertainty, eat away at them. I closed the notebook, a sense of cold satisfaction settling over me. This wasn't revenge. Not really, it was reclamation. I was taking back what was mine, not just my money, but my dignity, my self-respect. I was reminding them, and myself, that I wasn't a forgotten old man, a burden to be discarded. I was still here, and I was still in control. The rain continued to fall, but the tempest inside me had quieted, replaced by a strange, almost unsettling calm. I had a plan, and Christmas was just around the corner. Rain lashed against the windows, mimicking the turmoil inside me. "This is my house now, old man," my son-in-law sneered, "and you'll either start pulling your weight or find somewhere else to live." His words, sharp as shards of glass, echoed the ultimatum my daughter had delivered just hours before. Serve my husband or get out of my house. I'd worked my entire life for this house, brick by painstaking brick. Now it felt like those bricks were crumbling around me, burying me under their weight. "What exactly do you mean by pulling my weight?" I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. My throat felt tight, constricted. "This isn't a free ride," he retorted, pacing the living room like a caged animal. "We have expenses, mortgage, bills, food you contribute or you're out." He jabbed a finger in my direction, his face contorted in a mask of anger. "We're not running a charity here. I paid off the mortgage years ago. I manage," the words catching in my throat, "and I've always contributed to household expenses." I felt a strange detachment, as if observing this scene from a distance. This couldn't be happening, not in my own home. That was then. My son-in-law snapped, his voice dripping with contempt. "Things change. You're living under our roof now. You need to pay your way." He folded his arms across his chest, a smug look plastered on his face. The rain outside intensified, the wind howling like a banshee. I looked around the room, taking in the familiar surroundings. The antique clock on the mantelpiece, a gift from my late wife, the family photos adorning the walls, now mocking me with their captured moments of happiness. This house, once a sanctuary, had become a prison. My own daughter, my own flesh and blood had turned it into one. "Fine," I said, the word barely a whisper. I surprised myself with the calmness in my voice. A strange sense of resolve, a cold steel core, had begun to form within me. My son-in-law raised an eyebrow, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. "Fine? What?" he asked. "Fine?" I repeated, my voice gaining strength. "I'll leave." I turned and walked towards the stairs, each step a deliberate act of defiance. "Where do you think you're going?" he called after me, his voice laced with confusion. "To pack," I replied, not bothering to look back. "I'll be out by morning." The silence that followed was thick with unspoken words, heavy with the weight of what had just transpired. I entered my bedroom, closing the door behind me, shutting out the storm raging both outside and within the house. The room, once a haven, felt cold and unfamiliar. I opened my closet, the scent of cedar clinging to the clothes hanging inside. I pulled out a suitcase, placing it on the bed. It seemed impossibly small, inadequate to hold a lifetime of memories. I began to pack, my movements mechanical, almost robotic. A few changes of clothes, toiletries, a small framed photo of my wife. I deliberately left behind the larger items, the furniture, the books, the mementos. They were just things, after all, possessions, and possessions could be replaced. As I zipped the suitcase closed, a single tear escaped my eye. I quickly wiped it away, ashamed of my weakness. This was not the time for sentimentality. This was the time for action. I glanced around the room one last time, a strange sense of peace settling over me. This chapter of my life was over. I was turning the page, starting anew, and as I walked out of that house, suitcase in hand, I knew that this was not the end. It was just the beginning of something new, something different, something better. The rain had stopped. The first rays of dawn were beginning to paint the sky with streaks of pink and orange. I took a deep breath of the crisp morning air, a sense of anticipation building within me. They thought they had won. They thought they had broken me. They had no idea what was coming. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across my bedroom floor. I folded another shirt, a crisp white Oxford, and placed it neatly in the suitcase on the bed. It wasn't much, this suitcase. It held the essentials, a few changes of clothes, my toiletries, a couple of books. It didn't hold a lifetime of memories. The echoes of laughter in the hallways, the scent of birthday cakes baking in the oven. Those, it seemed, I was leaving behind. Emptying the drawers, Dad, my daughter, stood in the doorway, arms crossed, an eyebrow raised. "Just sorting through some things," I reply, my voice even, betraying none of the turmoil churning inside. She stepped into the room, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. "You know, you could just stay. If you apologized to Julian." I paused, my hand hovering over a stack of sweaters. "Apologize for what?" I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. "For disrespecting him," she said, her tone sharp. "For undermining his authority in this house." I closed my eyes briefly, took a deep breath, and continued packing. "This house," I corrected gently, "that I built," she scoffed. "It's my house now, Dad, and you know the rules." I didn't reply. There was no point arguing. The words, "serve my husband or get out of my house," still rang in my ears, sharp as a slap. The memories, the love, the years of providing for them, all apparently meaningless now. I finished packing, zipped the suitcase shut, and stood. My daughter watched me, her expression unreadable. "Leaving so soon?" she asked. A hint of something, was it regret, flickering in her eyes. "I have some business to attend to," I said vaguely. I walked past her, out of the room, and down the stairs, my suitcase bumping softly against each step. In the hallway I paused, looking back at the family portraits hanging on the wall. U.S. at the beach, Eleanor's graduation, Christmas mornings around the fireplace. I reached out and touched the frame of one, a picture of Eleanor as a little girl, her gap-toothed grin radiating pure joy. "You'll regret this," I murmured, more to myself than to the empty hallway. I continued on, out the front door and into the waiting taxi. As the car pulled away from the curb, I looked back at the house, the only home I'd ever known. My daughter stood on the porch, watching me go. I couldn't tell what she was thinking. I checked into a modest hotel near the airport. The room was small but clean, with a view of the bustling city below. I unpacked my suitcase, carefully placing my few belongings in the drawers. Then I sat down at the small desk, pulled out my laptop, and logged into my online banking account. The numbers on the screen glowed back at me, a testament to 2 years of hard work and careful planning. I clicked on the first account, the one I had set up for my daughter's college education years ago. It was still substantial, even after she had graduated. With a few clicks, I transferred the remaining balance to a new account, one that she couldn't access. Then I moved on to the next account, the one I had set up to help her with her wedding expenses. Another few clicks, and the funds were gone, redirected to a different, secure account. I repeated the process with several other accounts, meticulously transferring funds, closing accounts, severing the financial lifelines I had established for my daughter and her husband. They had made their choice, and now I was making mine. I leaned back in the chair, a sense of calm settling over me. It was a strange feeling, this detachment. For so long, my life had revolved around providing for my family, ensuring their comfort and security. Now that was over. I had cut the strings, severed the ties that bound me. It was a painful process, but a necessary one. They wanted me gone. They wanted to control my assets, my life. They had underestimated me. They assumed I was old, weak, irrelevant. They hadn't factored in the quiet strength that comes from years of experience, the deep well of resolve that builds within a man who has been pushed too far. Oh, they thought they had won. They had no idea what was coming. I closed my laptop, a small, almost imperceptible smile playing on my lips. I had a flight to catch, a new chapter to begin, and somewhere, in the not-too-distant future, my daughter and her husband would realize the true cost of their actions. They thought they had taken everything from me. They were about to learn a valuable lesson about who really held the cards. I picked up my phone and called the airline, confirming my reservation. The agent on the other end asked me if I needed anything else. "No, thank you," I reply, my voice steady and clear. "That will be all." The gravel crunched under my tires as I backed the rental car out of the driveway. I hadn't realized how heavy my suitcase felt until I loaded it into the trunk earlier. It wasn't just clothes inside. It was the weight of their words, their callous dismissal. "Serve my husband or get out of my house," daughter had shrieked, her face twisted with a fury I'd never seen before. Son-in-law had stood beside her, silent but complicit, his smug expression a mirror of her contempt. I'd said nothing then. There was nothing left to say. Now, as the house receded in my rearview mirror, a strange calm settled over me. This wasn't defeat. This was a new beginning. I drove for hours. The monotony of the highway balm to the turmoil inside. I stopped at a roadside diner, ordered a black coffee, and pulled out my phone. The first call was to the bank. I'd like to freeze the joint account I hold with my daughter, I told the representative. There was a pause, a rustling of papers on the other end. Certainly, sir. Can I have your account details and the reason for freezing the account? I explained that I needed to review my finances, a polite way of saying I no longer wished to fund their lavish lifestyle. The next call was to the mortgage company. I want to discuss the mortgage on my property, I began, giving them the address of the house I'd once shared with my family, the house I had paid for in full years ago, foolishly transferring the deed to daughter's name just last month. I understand my daughter is listed as the owner now, I said, but I'm concerned about the upcoming payments. The representative, a young man with a clipped, professional tone, explained the terms of the mortgage, completely oblivious to the irony of the situation. Well, I said finally, it seems there's been a misunderstanding. I'll be contacting my lawyer to discuss my options. My lawyer, a shrewd woman named Mrs. Hayes, answered on the first ring. I need to initiate proceedings to reclaim my property, I told her, getting straight to the point. My daughter seems to be under the misapprehension that the house is solely hers. Mrs. Hayes, ever the pragmatist, asked for the details of the deed transfer and assured me she'd begin the legal process immediately. It might take some time, she warned, but we have a strong case. With each call, a sense of purpose solidified within me. This wasn't about spite. It was about reclaiming what was rightfully mine, about taking back control of my life. I finished my coffee, paid the bill, and returned to the car. My phone buzzed. It was daughter. I watched it ring, then silenced it. She tried again and again. I finally switched the phone off. Let her wonder, let her worry. I drove on, the setting sun painting the sky in fiery hues. I checked into a modest motel, the anonymity a welcome change from the suffocating atmosphere of my former home. I sat on the edge of the bed, the silence broken only by the hum of the air conditioner. My phone remained off. I had work to do. I opened my laptop and began researching investment opportunities, ways to rebuild my financial future. This wasn't the retirement I had envisioned, but it was a chance to start over, to build something for myself, something they couldn't touch, something they couldn't take away. The next morning, I called my financial advisor. I want to liquidate some of my assets, I instructed him, and I need you to set up a new account, solely in my name. He hesitated, probably surprised by my sudden change of direction. Of course, he replied, his voice carefully neutral. Can you tell me more about your investment goals? I explained that I was looking for long-term security, a way to ensure my financial independence. I want to be self-sufficient, I emphasized. I don't want to rely on anyone. After the call, I felt a surge of energy, a sense of liberation I hadn't felt in years. I went for a walk, breathing in the crisp morning air. The world seemed brighter, full of possibilities. The anger and hurt were still there, simmering beneath the surface, but it was no longer consuming me. It was fuel for my plan, a plan that was just beginning to unfold. I had a feeling daughter and son-in-law's world was about to get a whole lot smaller, while mine was about to expand in ways they couldn't even imagine. This Christmas was going to be very different indeed. The engine hummed beneath me, the miles blurring into a green-gold streak as I drove towards Pine Lodge. I thought back to the words that had echoed in my ears. Chased me from my own home. Serve my husband or get out of my house. Daughter's voice, usually so sweet, had been edged with steel. Now the steering wheel felt cool beneath my hands, a tangible reminder of the control I was slowly reclaiming. It had been a long, quiet drive, giving me ample time to reflect on the years I had poured into supporting my family, into building a life that I thought we all shared. I'd paid for daughter's education, her lavish wedding, even the down payment on the house that had now become my exile. It's an investment in your future, I'd told her, handing over the check. Our future, son-in-law had added, his smile tight. Now their future felt distinctly separate from mine. I glanced at the passenger's seat. My old leather briefcase sat there, unassuming, but containing the instruments of my quiet revolution. Inside were the documents, insurance policies, investment accounts, trust funds, all carefully crafted, all meticulously maintained over the years, each one a thread in the tapestry of their comfortable lives. Threads I was about to carefully unravel. I hadn't told them about the separate account, but one I'd quietly nurtured for years, a safety net I'd hoped never to need. Now it felt less like a safety net and more like a launch pad. I chuckled dryly, picturing son-in-law's face, and the mortgage payments suddenly stopped. "Don't worry, Dad," he'd said once, patting my shoulder with condescending reassurance. "We'll take care of you." He'd been so sure of his position, so confident in the power he thought he held, he had no idea. The Pine Lodge wasn't luxurious, but it was peaceful, nestled amongst whispering pines and a glassy lake. It was a place I'd come to fish as a boy, a place where I'd felt truly free. That feeling of freedom was returning, washing over me in waves as I approached the familiar turnoff. I reached for my phone, dialing the number of my financial advisor. "Richard," I said when he answered, "I'm ready to initiate phase 2. There was a brief pause, then Richard's voice, crisp and professional. "Certainly, sir. Just confirming. This includes the transfer of all designated assets into the secondary account." "That's correct," I replied, the lake shimmering ahead, reflecting the clear blue sky. "And Richard," I added, a touch of steel entering my voice, "begin the process of revoking all supplementary income streams, effective immediately." Another pause, slightly longer this time. "Understood, sir." He cleared his throat. "Are you sure about this?" "It's quite a significant change, absolutely certain," I said firmly, pulling into the lodge's driveway. "They told me to leave, Richard. I'm simply following their instructions." The air smelled of pine needles and damp earth. I ended the call, a sense of quiet satisfaction settling over me. The first phase had been leaving, the physical act of removing myself from their grasp. This, phase 2, was the financial disentanglement. It was a slow, deliberate process, like pulling weeds from a carefully tended garden. Except these weeds had taken root in my life, choked out my independence, and I was determined to uproot them one by one. I stepped out of the car, stretching my legs, the crisp mountain air filling my lungs. The lodge looked just as I remembered, rustic and inviting. The lake glimmered in the afternoon sun, promising tranquility. I had a reservation in my name, a small cabin overlooking the water. It wasn't the sprawling house I had once owned, but it was mine, entirely mine. I took a deep breath, the weight of the past few weeks beginning to lift. The fight wasn't over, not yet, but I had a plan, and for the first time in a long time I felt a sense of peace. I had a feeling the holidays this year were going to be interesting. The flickering neon sign of the Pine Lodge Motel cast a lurid glow on the peeling paint of the door as I fumbled with the key. Inside, the room was small, smelling faintly of stale cigarettes and pine-scented disinfectant, a far cry from the home I'd built, the home my daughter and son-in-law now occupied. "Just sign here," the weary-looking clerk had said. Pushing the registration card towards me, I signed, my hand surprisingly steady. I placed my worn suitcase on the luggage rack, its meager contents a stark reminder of my current situation. I sat on the edge of the bed, the springs groaning beneath me. "This is it," I muttered to myself, picking up the phone. "This is where it starts." My first call was to the bank. "I need to discuss my accounts," I told the automated voice, navigating the menu options until I reached a human. "I'd like to transfer all funds from my joint account with my daughter to my personal savings account," I requested, my voice calm and measured. There was a pause, a few clicks on the other end. "Certainly, sir," the bank representative replied. "Can you confirm your security details?" I provided the necessary information, each digit a small victory. "And the reason for the transfer?" she asked, a hint of formality in her tone. "I'm reorganizing my finances," I replied, a simple, irrefutable answer. Next, I called the mortgage company. "I'm calling about the mortgage on my property," I stated, reciting the address. "I need to discuss the repayment schedule." The representative on the other end confirmed my ownership. "I'd like to transfer the mortgage to an interest-only repayment plan," I explained, my voice unwavering. "This will significantly reduce your monthly payments, sir," the representative said, "but also increase the overall interest paid over the life of the loan." "I understand," I reply. "I'm prepared for that. Let them scramble to find the extra money each month. Let them feel the weight of responsibility they so readily assumed." My final call was to my financial advisor. "Good afternoon, Mr. Davis," he greeted me warmly. "How can I help you today?" "I need to make some adjustments to my investment portfolio," I told him. "I'm looking to liquidate some assets and transfer the funds to a more secure, low-risk investment." "Of course," he responded. "May I ask what prompted this change in strategy?" "I'm simply securing my future," I stated, leaving no room for further inquiry. He agreed to initiate the process immediately. I hung up the phone, a wave of exhaustion washing over me. But it wasn't the fatigue of defeat. It was the weariness that comes after a long battle, the quiet satisfaction of a plan meticulously executed. I looked around the small motel room at the faded curtains and the flickering television screen. This wasn't where I expected to be, but it was a necessary stop on my journey. I opened my suitcase and pulled out a small, leather-bound notebook. It contained the details of my other assets, the ones they knew nothing about: the vacation home in Aspen, the vintage car collection, the offshore accounts. These were my secrets, my safety net. My daughter and son-in-law had assumed they had control, that they had won. They believed that by pushing me out, they were inheriting my life, my resources. They had no idea what I had tucked away, the true extent of my wealth. The sun began to set, tainting the sky in hues of orange and purple. I watched the colors shift and change, a sense of calm settling over me. I had given them everything, supported them unconditionally, only to be cast aside like a worn-out shoe. They wanted the house, the comfort, the financial security. They wanted the fruits of my labor without the labor itself. Now they could have it. Let them experience the true cost of ownership, the burden of responsibility. Let them learn the hard way that a house is more than just bricks and mortar, and that financial security is a privilege, not a right. I reached for the remote control, turning on the television. The news anchor droned on about the rising cost of living, the economic downturn, the struggles facing families across the country. I couldn't help but smile. They thought they had pushed me into the abyss. They didn't realize that I had simply stepped aside, leaving them to stumble in on their own. My phone buzzed. It was a text from my daughter. "Dad," it read, "we need to talk." I closed my eyes, letting the phone slip from my hand onto the bedspread. Tomorrow I would call her back. Tomorrow the real game would begin. I had one more surprise for them, one final act that would solidify their downfall and secure my future. The Aspen property. It wasn't just a vacation home. It was a carefully cultivated investment, ready to be harvested. And they wouldn't see it coming. The flickering neon sign of the Pine Lodge Motel cast long shadows across the parking lot as I sipped my lukewarm coffee Sunday morning. It had been a week since daughter's words, "Serve my husband or get out of my house," echoed in my ears, pushing me out the door with nothing but a suitcase. Now, sitting here in this cheap motel room, a sense of calm settled over me. I unfolded the local newspaper, the crisp pages rustling in the quiet. The crossword puzzle held little interest. My gaze drifted to the small, framed photo on the knitstand, daughter as a little girl, beaming, a gap-toothed grin splitting her face. A pang of sadness hit me, quickly replaced by a steely resolve. I reached for my phone. "Good morning," I said to the automated voice banking system. "I need to make some changes to my accounts." The first call was to the mortgage company. "Yes, this is regarding the property at 14 Oak Street," I confirmed. "I'd like to stop making automatic payments on that account." The representative on the other end stumbled a little. "Sir, are you sure this could lead to foreclosure?" "Yes, I understand the implications," I replied calmly. "I'm certain of my decision." A brief pause followed. "Very well, sir. Just a moment while I process this request." The second call was to the insurance company. "I need to cancel the homeowner's insurance policy on 14 Oak Street," I stated plainly. "Certainly, sir," the agent replied. "May I ask why?" "The property is no longer under my care," I answer, my voice betraying no emotion. "I understand, sir. Could you please confirm the policy number?" I provided the information, a small knot tightening in my stomach. This felt final. Finally, I dialed the credit card company. "I'd like to report my card lost," I began. "And also, I want to close the supplementary card linked to my account." "Of course, sir. Can you confirm the name on the supplementary card?" the representative asked. "Yes, it's under the name of Julian," I reply, the name of my son-in-law feeling like acid on my tongue. "Right, sir. The card will be deactivated immediately, and a new card will be issued to you within 5 business days. I hung up, the silence in the room amplifying the weight of my actions. 3 phone calls, 3 severed lifelines. I had spent years building a comfortable life for my family, only to be cast aside like an old, worn-out shoe. I had given them everything, including the roof over their heads, the very ground they walked on. Now that ground was shifting beneath their feet. I glanced at the clock on the knitstand. Almost noon, the sun streamed through the motel window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I packed my few belongings, checked out, and walked to the nearby diner. The smell of bacon and coffee hung heavy in the air. I ordered a simple breakfast, my appetite surprisingly robust. As I ate, I thought about the future. What would I do? Where would I go? The truth was, I had no concrete plans. For so long, my life had revolved around my family, around providing for them. Now, that purpose was gone, but in its place a new sensation was emerging, a sense of freedom. A clean slate. I had spent my life building a fortress for others. Now it was time to build something for myself. I paid for my breakfast and stepped back out into the sunshine. The world felt different, somehow brighter, fuller. I took a deep breath, the crisp air filling my lungs. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, a long time, I felt a flicker of anticipation. I hailed a cab, and as I climbed in, I gave the driver an address. Not the address of my former home, but the address of a small, secluded cabin I had recently purchased deep in the mountains, a place where I could finally be alone, to think, to breathe, to rebuild. A place where the echoes of daughter's hurtful words couldn't reach me, a place where I could start again. The cab pulled away from the curb, leaving the Pine Lodge Motel and all its memories in the rearview mirror. The road ahead was long and uncertain, but as I looked out at the passing landscape, I felt a strange sense of peace. The game, it seemed, had just begun.